Oh man, I was pumped when I saw the announcement and absolutely giddy waiting for the Logitech G Pro X Superlight to arrive at my doorstep. But dang, you have been hard to review. To start, I want to give you 3 different perspectives, as that is the only way that I know how to give you a fair view on this mouse. First, as a standalone product without a massive following of the G Pro Wireless and the G Pro X, it would be a forgettable mouse with a safe but excellent shape. As the specs just simply don't justify the $160 price premium, which would make most people avoid it altogether, as you can get the same, if not better performance, feel, and specs for approximately $60 less. However, coming in at a lower price between $99 to $130 would make it a top contender. Second, compared to the G Pro Wireless and the G Pro X, it is a minimal upgrade, as it comes with some much needed and appreciated improvements that further refines a legendary product. But a lot of things also remain the same. If you want a more in-depth answer, check out my comparison video between the OG Superlight and the Superlight 2, link down in the description. It will continue to be recommended as it is a safe shape that performs great and is overall a great option. If you love the G Pro Wireless or the G Pro X, you'll definitely find this a worthy upgrade for $30 more, as the quality of life improvements such as the USB-C charging, the optical switches that will never double click, and slightly improved sensor performance with the 2000 Hz polling rate is easy to justify. But if you can find the G Pro X for more than $30 off, things get a bit more complicated and difficult and really will come down to your own personal preferences. Third, in comparison to your average $50 gaming mouse, it feels more premium in every single way, making it an easy choice for an upgrade. But looking more critically at what else you can buy for the same $160 price point, things get a lot more complicated, as the Razer Viper V2 Pro, the Death Adder V3 Pro, and the upcoming Final Mouse Ultralight X have better sensors, latency by a few milliseconds, polling rate 2000 Hz compared to 4000 and 8000 Hz, side button crispness, PTFE glide/thickness, and debatable the primary clicks. While the benefits of the G Pro X2 is excellent, as it has wonderful shape, coating, and consistency and battery life, if instead we look at where it does perform, which is in the upper tier instead of the premium tier, then you can save $60 by going with the Lamzu, Vaxi, or Pulsar, which will give you similar and perhaps even better results in every single category, or even as much as $90 by going with the Razer Viper V3 Hyperspeed, which will net you a nice bump in specs, which include sensor, polling rate, and latency, along with a similar shape, coating, and better feeling primary clicks, side buttons, and PTFE feet, which isn't to say that this isn't an S-tier mouse and that I greatly enjoy using it, and it definitely has grown on me the more I use it, but the competition has caught up and taken the crown due to Logitech's lack of innovation, making it a lower S-tier than it used to be. Check out my other comparison video in the description down below for more in-depth info on that, such as the Death Adder V3 Pro and the Viper V2 Pro. And that is what makes this such a tough product to review, as it kind of sits in this middle awkward place, as it is completely dependent on what perspective you are coming from, if this is worthy of becoming your next new mouse or not. If you've got a specific question that I don't answer in this review, the comment section's got you. So, screw the specs and the benchmarks. How does it feel when using? It has the same legendary feel as its predecessors, where you forget that it exists in your hand. The coating is grippy, the clicks are snappy and crisp, and the performance is higher end. Everything is consistent and feels reliable, which is perhaps the most important thing about this mouse. In the back of your head, you know that the pros will use this to win tournaments, that many will say this is the best mouse on the market, and by owning it, that you have that exclusive card where you know that your game suckage has nothing to do with your mouse. That's because the marketing works. Despite it not having the best specs on the market, you won't care because the shape is safe. It is comfortable and it performs extremely well, whether it be in a competitive gaming scenario or casual workflow. With some of the best battery life on the market, you'll rarely have to charge it, and when you do have to charge it, it is now less frustrating with that USB-C port. It does take some breaking into. Specifically, the primary clicks start off being very heavy but loosen up over time, and the PTFE are extremely scratchy for the first 2 weeks before starting to glide smoothly. At the end of the day, you're reminded why this is such a legendary product. I've heard the primary clicks have changed. Sometimes they are heavy, sometimes not. What do they actually feel like? They've upgraded the clicks to Light Force hybrid optical mechanical switches, which solve the main complaints of the OG Superlight, double clicking. They are hybrid, meaning they still have the mechanical features to give you a mechanical feeling when you press it, which is kind of like a slight tactile bump, while still providing the benefits of optical for faster response time and immunity to double clicks. Personally, they've really grown on me, and I'm definitely a fan, but think this will be the most tumultuous part for most users, and I would love to hear your opinions on it in the comment section down below. So I got two Superlight 2s and returned my black one for a pink one due to getting a much better price of $124 compared to $160. They had a shocking amount of variance, which could be me just getting super unlucky and getting polar opposites, or it could be some QA issues at work. Time will tell based on what other reviewers are saying. One of the most drastic changes were the primary clicks. The black variant had light actuation force like my OG Superlight, whereas my pink variant was medium/heavy. Over the last 2 weeks, this has loosened up to now be light/medium, but is still not as light as my OG Superlight. The black version had mild pre-travel with moderate post-travel, where my pink version has equal pre- and post-travel. Online, I'm seeing similar results, which means until they tighten tolerances, your click feel will be up to luck of the draw on whether you get a light click or a heavy one. Judging off Logitech's previous timeline of click issues with the G Pro Wireless and the G Pro X, that could be another year or two before we see any changes. The clicks themselves are about 4 decibels higher than the G Pro X at about 60 decibels when you're right up next to it, which means in a quiet office environment, you may bother your coworkers. But since it is a deeper sound, it doesn't seem to be quite as loud, and I didn't have any problems where I work, which tends to be pretty quiet. They feel extremely crisp and satisfying. The ability to spam click will vary on how heavy your switch feels, but I had no issues at both ends of the spectrum, scoring the same even though the heavy ones subjectively felt a lot slower. There is a good amount of side wobble and play with the Switch. That only becomes a problem, however, for those who hold their mouse in a weird position. Get burned! So how do the side clicks feel? Please tell me. Are they crisp and satisfying? I don't know why I'm going for a super annoying voice there, but hey, we're just going with the flow. They're mid. They are in a good spot for your thumb, making them easy and comfortable to press. With them being separated, they are also very easy to differentiate, but come across as mushy as they have long pre-travel with short post-travel and go into the shell quite a bit. However, I do feel a crisp click at the very end. However, that click is masked by that really long pre-travel. If you have a G Pro X, these feel pretty much exactly the same, just move slightly less. And I do seriously have to hand it to Logitech for their consistency of the side clicks between all three of their mice. They feel exactly the same. But it is disappointing that this wasn't fixed after being a main complaint of the OG G Pro X. But I have no issues using them in games or with normal browsing. Okay, so the side buttons were a miss, but surely the scroll wheel has been improved. This was another part that varied wildly from my 2 copies that I tried. My black variant was extremely light with poorly defined steps and required a modest amount of pressure to middle click. But the middle click barely moved, felt incredibly mushy, and borderline defect. In games, it made it wildly unpredictable as I had a hard time sticking it in place when scrolling and would slip with middle click all the time. Whereas with the pink version, it is a bit tighter but is still light in feel, has more defined steps, light/moderate pressure for middle click with a nice tactile bump, and is easily spammable. While I can rely on it in games, I find myself having to be very aware of how much or how little I am clicking to make sure that I'm hitting right in the middle of that bump, or I constantly go too far and then have to retract and stuff like that, that it does get in the way while gaming. So I do wish that it was a little bit tighter, but I think that's going to come up to personal preference. But I had no issues with middle click, and that was fully reliable. But this feels great when scrolling outside of games. Okay, so the scroll buttons and the scroll wheel are questionable, but the new sensor is a GOAT, right? The second biggest difference is the Hero 2 sensor. Previously, with the Hero sensor, I felt it was laggy, floaty, and I had to constantly fight it to do what I wanted, making me hyper aware of the mouse that was in my hand instead of the game that I was playing. This is now mostly resolved with the Hero 2, as I find myself forgetting the mouse is in my hand more often. However, with micro adjustments, the sensor still fights me, and it never truly feels like an extension of my arm like the Focus Plus, Focus Pro, and 3395 does. I find with the Hero 2 compared to the Hero, when I flick, I'm on target more often. If I'm slightly off, it's easier to micro-adjust to the correct position, likely from the increased frame rate from 16.6 kHz to 25 kHz, along with better processing and overlap array size. But still the thing that I fight the most when trying to move pixel to pixel. Where it performs best is tracking, as I can just straight up beam people and it feels great. I find myself sticking to people more often and for longer durations, but despite the improvements, it still feels significantly behind the Focus Plus or Focus Pro, and that does everything I just mentioned better, more consistently, and easier. Moving outside of my subjective findings, the latency results from other YouTubers with cooler tech than I have found the latency is around the same as the Hero, but behind some of the other top performers such as the Razer Viper V2 Pro and the Death Adder V3 Pro, putting it into the higher tier but bottom premium tier in results. But this is separated by milliseconds, which some would argue doesn't matter. I respectfully disagree, but I recommend checking out Haas Gaming for those results, link down in the description, and I'm sure you have other YouTubers that you watch reviews for that might have mentioned that. You are able to adjust DPI in increments of 10 compared to 50 to 100 with the competition. With their DPI deviation tool, it can be in increments of 1, which is quite impressive. Finally, for those who hated how low the LOD was, it is now able to be adjusted from low, medium, and high, which I'm not sure actually does anything, as even on high, it won't track with a single DVD, which is 1.2 millimeters. But subjectively, I can tell a difference between low and high, where it feels to be about double the distance of height that I go to between the two. Well, I need to buy third-party PTFE Feet. Outside of slightly different shape from the previous edition, they are the same. They look incredibly thin, sit inside of trays, and for the first 2 weeks were probably the scratchiest PTFE Feet that I have ever used. And I'm one of those people that, in general, just doesn't care about PTFE because it just works, and I'm fine with it. So for me to be like, bro, these are rough, means that it's pretty significant. But then something crazy happened, and they got significantly smoother, and now I'm left flabbergasted, as I quite enjoy them. Now, they are close, but still not better to Razer's out of the box, which is to say that after the break-in period, I think your average person will be just fine with them. Otherwise, you'll probably want to replace them. If you're on the fence, wait for them to break in before deciding. Okay, so tell me about the shape, size, and weight, please. Shape is the same potato shape we have come to love. The reason why I say potato is because it's like a medium-baked potato. Very oval with a thin, rather flat sides that come in just a smidge, with a strong middle hump with a medium taper off the back and a light taper off the front, allowing the primary buttons to be mildly declined. Scroll wheel sits a good way out of the shell. On the bottom, you have large pads of PTFE Feet, the on-off switch, no DPI switch, and a place to store your dongle. The PowerPlay recharger is sold separately, or a plastic or PTFE puck can be placed in there. It is a medium to large size mouse, best for all grip styles, but I think it does fingertip the worst just because that hump and how the overall size, where I think claw and palm are going to be your most dominant, with palm being how big your hand is. We're at 60 grams, which is what I would classify as the Goldilocks of weight, being not too heavy, but not too light either, but just right. Some studies have backed this up, where most people preferred 60 grams and performed best at it, where going heavier or lighter was a mixed bag of performance, with some performing better and some performing worse. Overall, balance is good, but another factor where my black version felt incredibly well balanced, both on the front and on the sides, where my pink version doesn't feel as well balanced on the sides from left to right, but feels just fine front to back. But overall, it feels lightweight, responsive, and easy to manipulate. So the dongle, is it bigger? Well, yes. Yes, it is. It is a larger dongle that, as mentioned, can be stored inside of the mouse. It's about twice the size of the previous dongle. With this increased size, it unlocks 2000 Hz polling, which is appreciated. As nearly all of the other competition comes with 1000 Hz out of the box, I have noticed a better wireless connection compared to the OG Superlight, where I noticed less skips and issues. Overall, I'm glad that they give you 2000 Hz out of the box, and I'm hopeful that they will be releasing 4000 to 8000 Hz down the line with a separate dongle, as I think they'd be crazy not to. Yes, that's great and all, but do you actually feel a difference between 1000 and 2000 Hz? Because to me, it's just a gimmick. I don't find a huge difference between 1000 and 2000 Hz. The jump to 4000 Hz and 8000 Hz is definitely more noticeable. Earlier, I mentioned hitting my flicks easier, micro-adjusting easier, and tracking easier with an improved sensor. Having an increased polling rate helps improve those same things. But at 2000 Hz, that jump is itty bitty and not really worth upgrading solely for. But I keep mine at 2000 Hz at all times, as I do enjoy that extra responsiveness. One thing to note, if you don't feel a difference with increased polling rate, that could be due to a few different reasons. First, they recommend a minimum of 1600 dpi, ideally 3200 dpi or higher. If you're at 400 or 800 dpi, which is the majority of people, you aren't saturating the line enough to allow it to make a difference. Second, if you don't have a high refresh monitor with low latency, which I would say is a minimum of 144 Hz, ideally 240 or 360 Hz or higher, you may not feel it. Third, skill. If you aren't very perceptive on latency in general, you probably won't feel something as nuanced as increased polling rate, especially at 2000 Hz. Moving on to the battery life, despite heavy usage, I haven't had to charge mine over the past 2 to 3 weeks. I charged it to 100% when I first got it. It is now at 65%, and that is with 2000 Hz polling and optical mode on for the switches. Inside of Logitech G Hub, which I absolutely hate, they report 95 hours of constant motion with 1000 Hz and hybrid switch mode on, which you can see in the software. This is reduced by changing either or both of those settings to 51 hours, which is going to be expected as higher polling rate increases power draw and optical switches are always using more energy than mechanical, which is one reason why you see a big difference between the battery life of the old G Pro X and the Viper V2 or any of the Viper line. Moving into the conclusion, when I first bought this mouse, I was upset as the minor improvements with the G Pro X2 were not worth the $160 extra. I found it to be completely forgettable, thought that without the legendary status associated with it, that nobody would care about it, which made me very sad. But the more I used it, the more I broke it in, the more it grew on me. Now the clicks feel better than the OG Superlight. I'm over the moon that I can finally charge all of my mice with a single USB-C cord. The scroll wheel and side buttons continue to be a disappointment, but work just fine. The shape, coating, weight, balance, color all feel premium, and the PTFE Feet have finally caught up after 2 weeks. But most importantly, it accomplishes the same thing as the predecessor, that in use, you completely forget about it. It is highly consistent and allows me to do what I do best, which is destroy noobs! If you have a G Pro X, I don't think spending the extra money on the G Pro X2 is worth it. I would definitely wait until this one breaks. If you are coming from another premium mouse to this guy, I definitely don't recommend it, as you won't be getting better performance from a spec standpoint. But shape can be a major player, and if you perform better with the G Pro X shape than, say, the Viper shape, then go for it. If you previously didn't enjoy the G Pro X Superlight shape, then there isn't really much here that's going to change your mind. And if you haven't ever tried a premium tiered mouse or are coming off a mid to lower end gaming mouse, this is a solid consideration that you just can't go wrong with. But there are other mice that come in cheaper or at the same price point that I think would treat you better, such as the Viper V2 Pro, the Death Adder V3 Pro, the Viper V3 Hyperspeed, the Lamzu Atlantis, the Atlantis Mini, or Thorn, or popular mentions such as Vaxi or Pulsar. Personally, it will continue to be on my desk, and I will randomly pick it up for a few weeks at a time, but inevitably I will return back to the Viper V2 Pro, Death Adder V3 Pro, Viper Mini SE, or the Viper 3 V3 Hyperspeed, as they just do it better. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. Is the Superlight 2 your bae? Is it everything you hoped it was? Am I wrong in my conclusions? Let's discuss in the comment section down below. Moving on to a new section of my videos that I want to start doing, daily life lessons not associated with this product. We live in an immoral world because we allow those who are immoral to get away with their deeds. It is a choice that we make, as no matter how good or bad things are, we are still bound by cause and effect. If we want things to be better, we have to choose to be better first. And we must discourage those things that we no longer want to be a thing. And we start that by doing this in our personal lives instead of waiting for somebody else to come along and do the right thing. As the famous saying goes, be the change that you want to see in the world. If you like this video, leave a like. If you hated it, leave a dislike, and subscribe if you would like to see more like this. Otherwise, I wish you the absolute best. God bless, and peace out.